All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Just going to take a couple of minutes, let more people join in before we kick things off. Thank you for joining us. While we're waiting for other folks to join, would love to hear where everyone's dialing in from. So if you don't mind, just drop it in the chat. Where are you calling from? And what company do you work for? You're the founder of. Love to hear all of the different geographies that are represented and all of the different kinds of businesses. I can kick things off by saying that I am based in Boston. And I work for the Education Impact Fund. I just saw your application come through, so that's awesome. Thank you so much for applying. We will definitely take a look at that real quickly here. Awesome. We've got two MIT folks from my team that are both such smart people here listening to other smart people like Rob. Oh, wow. There's somebody all the way from India, huh? Dude, what time is it right now? It's 11:30. All right.
I was just looking that up.
10:30 p.m.
Tell you what I would be doing at 10:30 p.m. on a Thursday.
I'm boring very loudly and keeping my wife awake. That's what I'd be doing, for sure. She is not happy these days. Cool. Awesome. Is your kid waking up through the night?
Oh, yeah. And she's, you know what?
I
think I'm awake and I think everyone else should be.
That's the bewitching hour. Nice. That makes sense. Awesome. One last call out for everyone. We're just throwing into the chat where we are dialing in from, what location and what company we work for, have founded. It's just always fun to see all of the different representations. So let's keep that going. Awesome. I think we've got enough of a quorum here to get started. Let me just start by saying welcome everyone to the EIF and Avalanche VC Spring Learning Series. This one is specifically focused on GTM essentials. I'm really excited to dig into different aspects of GTM. We're really excited to continue to co-host this series with Avalanche. It's the second one that we're doing. We did one in the fall, which all of the attendees, some of the folks, even today, I'm recognizing familiar names, all of these folks that attended that series and really appreciated the content. We decided to do it again. For those who don't know me, my name is Atin Batra. I am a director of impact investing at the Education Impact Fund, which is one of the two co-hosts. Education Impact Fund is a $250 million evergreen venture fund. We specifically focus on investing in companies that are improving post-secondary access, as well as career success outcomes for an underserved population in the United States. We've invested in almost 29 portfolio companies. That number keeps moving, so maybe I'm off by one. But essentially, we're in that 28, 29 portfolio companies, direct investments as of this moment. And then we're investors in multiple funds in the education space. Some of those names you will have heard of. And the one that I want to highlight, obviously, is Avalanche and Caitlin. So we are actually LPs and investors in Avalanche VC's fund, have been long-term admirers of Caitlin. And Avalanche VC, just from an introduction standpoint, invests in pre-seed companies that are transforming how people learn, earn, and own, which I find the best way to explain what it is something that is quick, succinct, pithy, and that people remember. And I think Caitlin's done a great job of that. And then we're also obviously very excited to welcome today's speaker, so Rob Snyder, who is a multi-time B2B founder. He is a fellow at the Harvard Innovation Labs and teaches other people how to be super smart. He's going to kick things off with our first session today on the art of customer discovery and the pitch. Rob is our content partner and the lead instructor for the EIF Catalyst program. The EIF Catalyst program is a 12-week program that helps education and workforce learning companies refine their product market fit and build repeatable sales playbooks. That's what Rob is here today to do, but also will be spending a lot of time with our cohort companies as part of that program. That program also comes with up to 250,000 in funding, and applications are open right now. So if you guys are interested, please do apply. We're starting to evaluate applications on a rolling basis and would love to take a look. And I think Danny, my colleague, just put in the link in the chat. So eifcatalyst.org. If you need any more information, just go to that website. And there is a link to schedule an office hour with one of our team members. So if you have any questions, you can always do that as well. That's everything that I wanted to cover from an intro standpoint. What am I missing, Rob?
Nothing. We ready?
Did I undersell you and your experience by any chance?
My experience, honestly, and
I
I'm just
doubt
the person
that's
who
the
keeps
case.
hitting my head against the wall, trying to figure out 0 to 1, how to grow, why startups
Yep.
take off.
And that, I remember, was it not 2 years ago when you gave me that story of you being in the middle of the 0 to 1 million phase? It struck me, as I've also been an entrepreneur in a past life, and it was just very resonant to me. It felt very personal and relatable, as I'm sure the other 30 people on this call are also feeling if they're founders. That is a tough space to be in. With all of that, I'm just going to turn this over to you, Rob. The floor is yours. We'll jump back in with questions towards the back end.
So today we're going to be focused on sales, customer discovery, product market fit. Like, why do certain startups take off? You probably need to know a little bit about me, though. The reason why I'm obsessed with this is that when I was getting started, something super weird happened at my startup. My background is I worked at McKinsey, great consulting firm, beats business into you, it's great. Then I got my MBA at Harvard. You come out of that, you don't come out of that super humble, I will tell you. And then when you raise $1 million pre-seed out of HBS, you're like, okay, cool. I've got this. We had done all the research. We had done all the experiments. We had pilot customers. We were ready to rock. And then I got punched in the teeth for 2 years straight. The 2 worst years of my life. It basically felt like we had done everything right up until that moment, and then customers just didn't care. The market didn't care. Nothing we did worked. So that sucked. But then the thing that happened after that was 2 years in, we went from 0 to 4 million in revenue. It finally worked. But it was really weird because everything about our business at that point was worse than what we had focused on for the prior 2 years. It wasn't even our idea. I had pitched a potential customer on workforce management software, and he kind of laughed at me. And then a couple of weeks later, he called me back and said, hey, you're a tech nerd. We're trying to solve for this. Can you help us with recruitment for hourly restaurant workers? I was like, I don't know anything about that, but screw it. Why not? From that moment to 4 million ARR was 2 years, which is crazy. For the first 100K ARR, we were literally just in spreadsheets. The product was me in a spreadsheet. We didn't have any plans. It just is what emerged as we tried to sell this. And we had a 4-slide sales deck that was essentially Comic Sans, if you know what that is. It was just ridiculous. And so this made 0 sense. It didn't make any sense to my brain. I had read all the books, listened to all the podcasts, taken all the courses. Basically, I've spent the past 5+ years trying to figure out what happened here. In doing that, I've taken 20 startups from 0 or near 0 to their first million ARR. The fastest growing startup I've worked with has done 0 to 10 million ARR in 18 months. I'm working on a book on this, which will be published at some point next year. I want to give you an overview of what I've learned, and we're going to get our way into sales, get some core concepts first. What I've learned can boil down to this. Demand is the only thing that matters for startups. It determines everything downstream. It determines whether our sales works, whether our messaging works. It tells us how to sell, who to sell to. It determines how fast we grow. It determines what product we should build. Unfortunately, we're never taught what demand is. We're not even given a way to think about demand. Most startups have a weird experience that causes them to intuit what demand is, which is what happened to me. Here's my friend's startup story. They're a company called Test. You're all software people. So they had built a QA automation platform to quickly test new releases. Their thesis was that we can use AI to make the QA process faster, which makes sense. This was back in 2019. So AI was a little less buzzwordy then. So what they sold was the fastest QA automation software on the planet. That sounds like a compelling value proposition. But what happened was they were at 10K ARR after 2 years. That is not good. Their sales cycles were 6 months with maybe 5% close rates for $200 a month contracts. Customers, even after they bought, were like, they had to force customers to use the product, even use the product for the customers to do QA stuff. The way they described it was that it felt like they were pushing and the market wasn't pulling. One thing happened, and they made one change, which didn't change the product at all. Didn't change their approach to selling, right? They just still kept doing outbound and sales. Didn't change their end customer at all. And they went from 0 to $1 million ARR in 11 months, 20x pricing. Sales cycles went from 6 months to 1 month, and customers were happy. Feel free to put in the chat, what do you think this change was? Anyone gotten any ideas? Positioning, tapped into customers' pain point. A lot of good things in here. They did somewhat change their messaging, their positioning, but that was a downstream change. To understand this, we have to split the world into the demand side and the supply side. The supply side is everything we traditionally focus on. It's everything that we make, it's our messaging, it's our positioning, it's all the stuff that we control, our product fits in there. It's our go-to-market approach even. The demand side is the world out there that we don't control. It's what buyers are trying to do in their lives. What Test was previously doing was they were pushing supply. They're saying buyers should want the fastest QA automation software on the planet. Now, in a couple of sales calls, buyers got frustrated with them when they were trying to push this. They say things like, I just want to get QA off of my plate. That gave them the hint that they were pushing supply that didn't fit the demand on buyers' to-do lists. And the way I think about demand is it's a project on a buyer's to-do list. So when buyers were trying to take action on QA, the project on their to-do list was to get QA off of my plate. They were pushing bad fit supply to buyers' demand, which was get QA off my plate. And they were using all of sales best practices, and it wasn't working. When it worked, they changed their supply, the way they described their product to fit buyers' demand. AI that gets QA totally off your plate. Buyers heard that and bought way faster, again, 20x the price, and bought faster, and the company was able to scale pretty quickly.
Rob, quick question, and I'm taking advantage of the fact that I have speaking privileges whereas others don't. Are you saying it was about connecting it to an outcome?
It was connecting it to what buyers were actually trying to do. Imagine every buyer has a to-do list in their brain. And on that to-do list, they're just going to prioritize whatever is number one right now. They're just going to do that first thing. And as they think about that item on their to-do list, they consider options and figure out what fits the project on their to-do list in their brain. What Test was doing was pushing something that didn't fit the project in a buyer's brain, and the buyer was rejecting it. And it didn't make sense to Test because they were thinking in this, should we offer more in our product? Should we build more features? They were thinking from the supply side versus understanding the project in the buyer's brain. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
I'm just trying to fit it into some framework in my head. So if it's not outcome, it's probably an output. And I think what you're saying, what is that task? What is that discrete task? To me, that's the output. That's what I want to get out of this. And that's what you're trying to fit into. not the outcome,
Yeah,
which would have been something else.
yeah,
Right.
it could be an outcome. It could be, but the way I just think about, I just literally picture a Asana board in buyers'
Fair.
brains.
Yeah.
And if I just think about it as a project that they're trying to focus on, right? A project has an outcome. People take action on things in the
Yeah.
shape of projects or tasks.
Oh, helpful.
Okay, so basically, this is the same pattern I've seen in every startup, which explains my journey too. We were suffering because I was pushing supply. When we took off, we found demand. And so demand is the design constraint for startups and will dictate everything up downstream of that. Because, right, first, we can't force people to buy things they don't want to buy. And we can't scale if every deal requires us to twist arms and put in a ton of effort to get any particular deal done and then retain people afterwards. Nobody is ever going to say, hey, this is awesome. Let me drop all of my priorities to buy your product. And I've now watched probably 3,000, 4,000 sales calls. I've never seen a single person be convinced to do something they weren't already trying to do. Buyers will pull a product out of our hands if 4 things are true. First, there is a project on the to-do list that is their priority right now. They look into options, but those options are lacking or limited. They can't complete the project with the options that exist. And so they're stuck with an unavoidable project on their to-do list with unworkable options. And that opens the space for our product. Our job is to figure out a buyer's pull and fit a product into that. And when we do it, they will rip the product out of our hands. We will not be pushing. So that gives me a way to explain early stage sales. How do we think about early stage sales? Sales is not about convincing people to buy a product. Sales is about finding people who have pull. These people need no convincing or very little convincing. Our ideal customer profile, ICP, like who are we trying to sell to? Our bullseye customers. That's not about all of the people who could benefit from it, the people who should want it. They aren't prioritizing the project. It's our ICP about who has pull right now. In a sales call, discovery, the structure is mostly to figure out if they have pull or not and what their pull is. Do they have an unavoidable project with unworkable options? We can talk through the structure of that conversation and what that looks like, but this is what we are looking for. We are looking for pull. And if they don't have pull, it is not a sales call, no matter how much we want it to be. So basically, they determine if they have pull, if it is a sales call or not. So zooming out one level further, this is how product market fit works. We are looking for one kind of customer with one kind of pull who needs no convincing or very little convincing to buy our product. They're trying to accomplish something and their existing options just don't fit. We deliver supply that fits. The combination of demand and supply you can think of as what I call a repeatable case study. If you find these kinds of people and deliver this through one scalable go-to-market channel, this is all you need to get to your first million or 100 million plus. This is the substrate for sales. This is what we are looking for, and how to sell builds on top of. I'll stop sharing. You can jump in with questions.
Yeah, folks, if you have questions, just type them out in the chat. If there's a conversation going, we'll probably even try and bring you up on stage here. I think just as people are writing these questions in, the quick thought that I have is this is all part of, customer discovery for sure. But then also, what do you do once you've discovered your customers? It's that sort of bridging the gap of you've identified the customers and now how do you actually get them to buy?
Yeah, and what I found is if you know what pull is and who pulls, then all you need to do in a sales conversation, the structure of a sales conversation is just like figure out if they have pull or not, and explain a case study of somebody else who looks like them who had pull. And those are basically the two parts of a sales conversation that you'll have. Which are like, we can talk about that at a high level. So there's the discovery part of a sales conversation. There's what are you focused on? Why did you take the call? What's going on in your world? What is your unavoidable project? What options have you looked into or tried, and what's missing? You figure out those things and recap that. They're like, this is the project I'm trying to prioritize. Here's why it's unavoidable right now. Here's what options I've looked into and why they are lacking. Our product does this. If you just say that, you don't need a really deep dive demo. You can have one slide on here. Our product fits that pull. And what they should do in that moment is say, oh my gosh, I've been waiting for this.
Actually, let's do this. I think Miriam has a question which I really like. Why don't we bring Miriam up on the stage so they can give a quick background on their company and product? Maybe we can answer that specifically. But as we're doing that, Danny, if you don't mind helping me bring Miriam on stage, as we're doing that, you just talked about unavoidable project. And I'm curious what's an example of how you define unavoidable? Is it unavoidable because of the cost it is costing the company? Is it unavoidable because of the value that it could deliver? How do you give an example of what unavoidable means to you?
Yeah, it's going to be different things. It could be that something could be unavoidable if my boss just yelled at me yesterday because I didn't do it, right?
That is always unavoidable.
Unavoidable. Something else could be unavoidable because a vendor I was relying on went out of business and I need to find something else. Another thing could be unavoidable because a new regulation was just passed and I have to figure out how to comply with that regulation. There are all sorts of things that cause something to be unavoidable, and each startup, it's different. The thing that forces a project onto someone's to-do list is often quite different.
Yeah, that's fair. Cool. I just want to quickly check if you're able to unmute. Probably not. Anyway, why don't we just try and answer that question? So Rob, Miriam is asking, how do you identify the pool?
So it depends at what stage you're at of a startup. If you're just at the idea stage and you don't know what pull could be, the answer is don't go to a whiteboard and try to guess. Go observe people and try to find projects that they're trying to do in their lives and figure it out from that. Or see what products people are buying. Maybe sometimes those products are them coping with having bad options. That's where startup ideas come from. At some point, you generate a hypothesis. Here's what I think pull is. You can then take that and go and sell. Try to sell with it. Show it to people who should look at that pull and say, oh my God, where have you been my whole life? And if you do that and they pull, amazing. You have a business, you have customers, you're growing. What often happens is that, and you have to debug that. Now, if you're later stage and you actually have customers, you're going to have a range of customers. Some who you had to push and persuade and convince, and some who bought really fast. And that's pre-sale. And then post-sale, some people who use it a ton, other people who don't. And so what you can do in that situation is you can look at your customers and compare and contrast them to try to figure out, okay, why did this person pull and this person didn't? And say, okay, and then you can get to the causality underneath that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, how much time do you want to spend on something like that? How do you think about the ROI on that?
Yeah, the ROI is your enterprise value, right? If you don't find pull, nothing else you do matters.
Yeah.
So way to think about it, there's a lot of people who could benefit from your product. So many people could benefit, but for most of them, it would be weird if they bought it right now, given what's on their to-do list. The traditional way we're taught to do things is just to spam the world, to get a bunch of cold callers to do whatever, and waste basically 90% of our effort on people who aren't going to buy. At least not right now.
Yeah.
Instead, when we know what pull is, we can focus on the people who need no convincing and find a way to get to them where it would be weird if they didn't hear about us at that very moment. and do nothing else.
I also want to keep moving to other questions. So Eric's question, which I think is a great one, is says, how do you get prospects to answer questions when they actually just want to jump into a product demo, especially if you know that's just going to distract?
I've seen a lot of demos or sales calls where this happens. This is quite a frequent thing when people come inbound to you, where they're like, I don't want to answer your discovery questions, just show me the product. The fastest way to get people out of that mode is to ask them, why did you take the call today? What's going on in your world such that you took this call? If you're outbounds, they're going to say, you messaged me. So yeah, there was something in the message that seemed relevant to you. What was it? What was particularly interesting to you? And what you're trying to do there is get what their pull is. What is their project? It doesn't necessarily need to take a lot of time for you to do this, but before you jump into and then they say, yeah, I don't want to hear about that. I just want to see your product. So I could show you my product, but I have no idea what you're trying to solve for. I talk to a bunch of people who try to see a bunch of different things. You've got to give me some guidance on what are you trying to solve for in your business? What's going on in your world? What options are you looking into? So I can show you something that will not waste your time.
When you've got some of these customers or potential customers on the call and their answer to that question is just because my boss asked me to book this call, how do you handle sales processes where there's multiple stakeholders involved and where there are several decision makers, or you're talking to a person who's actually not the decision makers? How do you solve through that process?
The way to think about this is there is one person at the company with the project. That person is going to be your champion. That is the person who is going to exert the force to get the deal done in the organization. Your job is to help them. Your job is not to sell. Your job is to help them get their project done in the organization. The way I think about this in my mind is the tush-push play in the NFL. My job is not to be the quarterback running the ball and getting pushed. My job is to help push from behind the champion through. That often means you have to collaborate with them. They should be telling you, okay, we need to talk to this person. This is what they care about. Your job is, cool, what can I arm you with? What can I show up with? How can I do all the work for you so that I can push you over the line? If someone junior is coming who's been asked by their boss, that's a tougher situation. What you want to try to do is get out of them like, what's the evaluation criteria? Why is this relevant? You often do wind up, that is an annoying situation.
But in many ways, that person could also end up being the champion. That's the silver lining or the upside opportunity that you need to grab, right? Yes, this person's probably a junior person and does not have the decision-making power, but if you are never going to get to interface with the decision-making sort of person, then this is the person who has to represent you. And so, again, going back to the whole process, that this person has to be a champion. So arm them as much as you can.
Yeah, and in that regard, right, there is the buyer's project that they're trying to get done in the organization. This junior person might have a totally different project that is much more around look good to my boss. That becomes the project that you are focused on.
Which is not, we've been junior people at companies that sometimes that is all you're thinking about. Yeah.
Actually, an example of that is so there's a lot of interesting things once you kind of like really embrace this pull thing. One example is someone was trying to sell a security vulnerability checking software to security engineers. The value prop he was pushing onto the market was it'll help you find more security vulnerabilities. Who wouldn't want that? Nobody bought because, and one security engineer talked to him was like, listen, dude, I'm never going to buy this because two things. One, it makes me look like I haven't been doing my job. And two, my bonus is entirely based on having fewer security vulnerabilities. So if I buy this, guess what happens? Guess who doesn't get their bonus? And so this isn't how I would like the world to work, but this is how the world works.
Yeah. And then in that case, you have to flip the script a little bit to say, what I'm trying to help you do is to reduce the number of vulnerabilities by actually showing you where you might be vulnerable rather than the other way.
You find some way.
Yeah, fair enough. Cool. We actually have one of our attendees, Kim Bria, who's got a couple of questions. Why don't we bring them up on stage and see if you can unmute yourself and ask your questions? Can you hear us?
Yes.
We
Yes.
can.
Okay.
Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, I think, depending on wherever.
Afternoon for most folks. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I had two questions. One of the first ones, I mean, first of all, thank you for speaking today. I really appreciate it. And I'm just excited to be here and take what I've learned and apply it to my current business. So I get started with the two questions. First question, can you further elaborate on how to best translate raw customer discovery insights into a compelling narrative for a pitch deck? So what do the VCs want to hear or the investors?
Ooh, that's a good question. So my answer is, plug your ears, VCs, I don't care. Specifically, what I'm talking about is what it takes to build a business that grows really fast and find really intense customer demand. This translates to what customers want to hear. Pull is all about what customers want to hear. VCs generally want to hear something else. You're going to lose your mind if you try to solve for both of these things together. Focus on what works for customers and you will grow very fast. And then you sell the growth story. And I'm a crazy person building a generational thing to VCs.
Okay.
Your sanity requires you to separate the two.
As a self-deprecating VC, I would say 100% agree. I think what Rob just said is very pertinent, especially in today's market where we're starting to see a bifurcation of companies that are well-known brand names and are growing virally, but do not have the unit economics, do not have the foundation to sustain that over a couple of years. And people are starting to recognize that is happening more and more often. And so the other set of companies that VCs are now turning their attention to are people who actually truly have customer pull, who are actually seeing momentum on the customer revenue side rather than do I have a lot of users or was I able to raise $1 million pre-seed because I came out of Harvard? At least that's how we are evaluating companies today. The first question we ask is just tell us about your revenue and how has that grown over the last year? And if you followed Rob's advice and been able to figure out the pull, that momentum of customer revenue is just going to really shoot through the roof. If we see that, then that makes it really interesting for us as a VC.
Thank you. Am I able to ask my second question or do I?
Go for it.
Go for it.
Okay, so my second question is, and I think you touched a little bit on this, but I am a little stubborn, so I feel like I need to hear this one again. What's one key takeaway or actionable piece of advice you'd want every founder here today to implement in their customer discovery process tomorrow?
Yeah, so what I want you to do is take that pull framework, use that for your customer discovery. You need to be checking the box on each of those 4 components. That is what customer discovery is, figuring out those things. Use that as a template. And then when you find somebody who really pulls, understand it deeply and find people who look just like them.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
You.
Awesome. We actually have one more person here, Justin, who we're going to bring up on stage and have him unmute. And Justin, you up?
I am. Rob, thanks for doing this. And it actually segues into what you just ended with. As you start to understand the projects and pull from your best customers, like you mentioned early on, you often have customers that all look different. Some use it, some aren't. When you start to understand that, how do you find others and go deeper to replicate that? Is it looking at firmographics? Is it something deeper? What have you seen work in the past?
Yeah, it's often something deeper. So I'll give an example. One of my friends' companies, they sell a tool that helps companies deliver learning and development training that is engaging and scales without facilitation. What they found is that The thing that puts an unavoidable project on a buyer's to-do list is when they have more demand for training than they have supply of facilitators, specifically when that demand for training goes way up. Their entire business depends on them figuring out when that happens in a company. And there are some signals they can find, certain hires, for example, certain press releases, things that give them a sign that is happening at a company. They can spend a lot of money figuring out what those signals are, getting all the data, and then going after those customers. They know that when the customer sees what they offer, they're going to buy it, and they're gonna rip it out of their hands. They're going to buy in weeks, not months. Yeah, like it becomes it is almost never firmographics. It is almost never just firmographics. At 200 employees, XYZ, like we sell to fintechs who have 200 to 500 employees. It's often about a situation that someone finds themselves in where they have to do this. And yeah, your job is to figure out what that situation is. Think of it as you put a toll booth right there. And they would be weird not to talk to you when they're going through that situation.
That's really helpful. Thanks so much.
How do you think about those kinds of situations being transitional? And what is bringing this up for me is we invest in education. There's a lot of macro headwinds right now. People are having trouble selling to K-12 schools or higher ed institutions. And we've also seen a huge uptake in companies that are providing market intelligence, companies that are focused on the education spaces, right? There's these companies that are going to say, oh, we'll use AI to scrub all the school board notes and provide intelligence, which I think is a great product, which is likely usable in all situations, but is extremely pertinent to today's time and age. And to me, it feels, I do not know if this is sustainable in the long run, but if you're in that company's shoes, how do you think about messaging today? And then when the winds shift, how do you shift your messaging?
Yeah, I just wish I had thought of that. That's such a sick idea.
Same.
God, that's so cool.
Yeah.
But what is the project that I actually don't think that's a macro thing. I think that's a right, like that is a I would be delinquent as a sales leader in the ed tech space if I didn't have that data, that intent data.
Irrespective of market conditions, right?
It's like Apollo has become in certain places where if you're doing any sort of outbound and you don't have a contact database, what the hell are you doing?
So the takeaway for me is keep digging further until you find something that is really core and foundational and irrespective of market movements.
Sometimes stuff will move, right? There could be some new regulation that prevents this from happening. That business is screwed for a moment, or some technological shift. These are waves that you have to navigate. Your pull will not be the same today as it will be 2 years from now, necessarily.
One other thing as I'm thinking about this, and I'm sure lots of people are thinking about this as well, is say you've identified the pull. How do you use that insight to then convert people through the funnel? How do you use that insight to then say, let's move you down the funnel?
Yeah, the cool thing is when you find pull, so let's talk about a sales process. Basically, 2 steps to sales. Step 1 is, do they have pull? If they don't, then drop off there. They might come back when they do have pull, but they don't have pull. Okay. Step 2 is basically, does your product fit their pull? That's where you do a little bit of a demo. That's where all of that fits in. You describe your product, they ask the questions, and they're trying to say, okay, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. Does this fit what I'm trying to accomplish better than my other options? The traditional ways we're taught about sales is there's a discovery call. We're trying to find their demand, find their pull. Then there's a demo call. We're trying to fit our supply into their demand and make sure it fits for them. Then after that, there's either they just buy right away because they can, or there's what I call project planning and like getting the deal done phase, which is that kind of like push that I mentioned before. And that can be a week, that can be 6 months. It can include just a 1-page contract, which I prefer, or it can include 14 demos with 37 different stakeholders or whatever. And so it's going to depend, but the first two stages, pull and supply fit, are always the same.
I'm also thinking about, so everybody's heard the AIDA model, right? Attention, interest, desire, and action, which for a lot of folks is probably the first thing they learn about sales, right? But what you're explaining here from a pull standpoint is in somewhat contradiction to that, because it's not about just getting attention or building awareness. That is not the first step. Like in many ways, the first step is maybe that interest piece. How do you figure out the pull? How do you figure out why someone is interested in this? And that really is the crucial kickoff point.
Yeah, there's another one that's really fun that's called BANT, budget, authority, need, timing. And you're told to screen for that in your discovery call. I've had so many awkward conversations trying to get that out of someone. They're like, listen, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Like, why are you asking me for my budget? Why are you asking me about my authority?
All right.
Pull is a way to assess the need if there is an organic need.
Right.
If they don't have a need, nothing else matters. If they do have an intense need, they will find the budget. They will get the authority. And timing solves itself. And so it's just a lot of basically all the sales advice out there, which a lot of it is really good and helpful, but it was basically designed for, you have a quota, you have a territory, you need to go and push your product onto there so you can make your quota. And who cares if they churn in 3 months? Like, that's not your problem. And so we get to redesign it around demand.
Yeah. It's interesting how a lot of this is flying in the face of traditional frameworks, but intuitively, it really makes a lot more sense. At least that's how I think about it. Let's take one last question. I know we're coming up on time here, but Sean says, what are the earliest indications of pull that are real? We're finding that our champions have pull, but the job that needs to be done isn't important enough for the rest of the organization.
Get budget given today's landscape. Yeah, this is tough and normal. There are so what you basically want is somebody, again, unavoidable project, unworkable alternatives. And if it is sufficiently unavoidable, they will bang down every door to say, I must have this. Sometimes what happens is you sell lower in an organization. The lower in the organization, the kind of less likely they are to have a truly unavoidable project and alternatives other than, yeah, you just work a couple long nights and deal with it. And so what you have to do is you have to zoom out and assess this. Is our champion here the right person to be able to get this done? Or like selling to junior salespeople, they're never going to get the VP of sales to buy something. It's just against the laws of physics in an organization. So you might consider looking elsewhere in the organization or finding a project that somebody is trying to do in the organization that they have to do because of today's landscape where you fit. Right? I've seen a lot of people where when the market's going up, they have one kind of pull. When the market's going down, they have another kind of pull. And because the market's going up, you have to buy it. But, in a down market, this is the only thing you have to buy. It would be weird not to buy this in the down market. It's about navigating whatever the winds are at the moment.
Yeah. I think the one other thing that we've seen, and this is more tactic than strategy, we've seen a lot of our K-12 portfolio companies really put in the effort to go out and find funding sources that apply to the solution. In a lot of cases, the teacher or the administrator who is your champion may not have line of sight to those funding sources or to those budget line items and how they truly interact in the end from a macro perspective in the school budget setting. Two companies that I'm on the board of, both K-12, have found lots of success in building one-pagers that say, if you want to buy our product, here's 3 funding sources that are available in your state. The idea is that when you're trying to champion this in your organization, not only do you convey all the value that the product's providing, but you also have this one-pager that you can show and say, by the way, I know you're going to struggle with finding space in the budget. here are 3 ways that you can get reimbursement for it or find channels and sources for it. And this goes back to what Rob was saying earlier. How do you provide ammunition to all of these people so they can be more effective champions for you internally in the organization? And that's another example of that from a tactic standpoint.
Love that. Love that.
Cool. I know we've worked up on time. I have 3 things that I want to say before we close this out. But the first one has to be, thank you very much, Rob. This was extremely helpful. I love it when we can actually get into these conversations back and forth and really break down the idea rather than just good slides, but always the conversation over the slides. So thank you. I also want to say thank you to Caitlin and Avalanche PC for co-hosting the series with us. Quick call out. We are doing our next session in the GTM series next week, Thursday, May 22nd, at the same time, 1 p.m. ET. And that session is specifically focused on how do you build a high-performance sales team. And that one features Matt Stinson, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at Starbridge, which is a very impressive company, which if you guys haven't looked at, you should definitely go and Google and search. Sean, I'm going to just pick on you because you said you're selling to Kate World. Starbridge is the market intelligence company that I was referring to earlier. Very helpful in the K-12 landscape. Give that a look. That session is next Thursday, 1 p.m. ET. And if you're interested, my colleague just put in the registration link, so please use that to register. And then the last one, what Rob covered today in the last 45 minutes is just a small sort of sprinkling of what he will cover during a 12-week program, which is the EIF Catalyst program. If any of you are interested in that program and learning more about GTM motion and building a repeatable sales playbook, please take a look at the program website, and we'd love for you to apply. If you have questions, just throw them our way. We'll happily answer as well. Thank you, everyone. I really hope you have a great day ahead, and happy Friday in advance. All right, have a nice one, folks. Thank you.